Welcome, fans of Star Trek, to this very special episode of the Captain's Yacht, the podcast that takes you on a tour of the next generation, episode by episode. However, this week we have a very special trajectory, a very special course plotted, and we will be briefly reviewing the successes and the not so successes of the first season of Star Trek Picard. I am your co-host and co-captain at Scholar Beta on all things social media, and I am hanging out with my co-host, friend, and co-captain of this podcast, Captain Kanaka. Welcome, my friend.
Yeah, glad to be here. I'm glad we get to do this special journey. This has been a long time coming. I've been waiting a long time for this day.
Excellent. Yes, me too. Hey, just a reminder out there to our fans, this is a podcast put together by two teachers. We're hanging out. We're trying to figure out the best way to do podcasting so we can get some of these ideas in front of our students. Our goal is to really practice experiential learning. We want kids to jump out there, get messy, put together a podcast, learn on the fly, learn from doing. And we're trying to get away from just, hanging out behind a textbook, taking a bunch of notes and then striking out. So again, this is an experiential podcast. We're grateful for all the folks who have continued to come along on this journey. And Captain, we've got a new segment we're going to be doing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm really excited about this. Thank you very much, Scholar Beta. So at the end of each segment, or if you're watching the light version of each episode, the end of the video, we have a special activity planned for you, our dear audience, to complete and submit via the comments a special Star Trek themed assignment that's related to something that we talk about. In a classic episode, there's 3 assignments. If you're watching this on the light version, it's just 1 assignment per video. It could be something from creating a meme. It could be something from creating a character, pitching a show, all those sorts of things. But how you submit or turn in your homework is by typing up something in the comments. Then when the next episode comes around, we will give our A+ commendations where either you, Scholar Beta, or me will call out a very special or a gold standard A+ assignment, and we talk about it briefly before we start recording. So if you're interested in that, please submit your homework and we'll get it graded and we'll see what we think about it. So I'm really looking forward to that. And with that said, this is the first episode of a special mini-series on Star Trek Picard. We actually have 3 planned. Mm-hmm. And that means this batch of episodes or batch of videos, if you're watching the light version, is 1. We're going to be examining characters the next episode. And the final episode, we'll be talking about general arc and plot construction. So with that in mind, Scholar Beta, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, just 2 other things really quickly. Spoilers ahead, my friends. By boarding the Captain's Yacht with us and going on this journey, you understand that we are going to be spoiling the entire first season of Star Trek Picard. If you haven't watched it, probably a good time to pause this review. Go check out those 10 episodes. We'll see you in about 5 hours. And then come on back and break it down with us over the next 3 weeks. But spoilers ahead, spoilers aplenty. I know even in today's episode, we're going to talk about the very end of the series as well. So just want to give you that heads up. And then one other really important thing, and I start almost every year in school talking about this. This is one of the most important things that will transform you as a student of literature, as a student of media, student of history, whatever it is. And that is you can both love something and be critical of it at the same time. Okay, when you exercise this mentality, when you become a critic with a capital C, right, you break away from that tribalist mentality that a lot of us kind of grow up with. We become DC people or Star Wars people or Star Trek people. But honestly, what we really want to do at this point, I feel like, in our study of this, is we both want to love on Star Trek and we also want to be critical of it simultaneously. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. It may sound in some X sections like we're, really hitting this thing hard, but in other ways, we're going to really be praising and lifting it up too. So with that said, Captain, anything else we need to say, or is it time to launch into the premise of the first season of Picard?
I think we're ready to launch, Scholar Beta. Make it so.
Here we go. So season 1 of Picard, I'm going to try to explain the premise in a couple sentences. Here we go. Picard works on his family vineyard, now retired from Starfleet, but is thrust back into the action when Dahj, a mysterious 20-something young woman visits him begging for his help. Dahj is killed off about 20 minutes later, and the next 9 episodes feature Picard searching for her twin, Soji, and helping her find her hidden homeworld before the Romulans do. Dun, dun, dun. Actually, when I wrote that premise, it's not so bad. It's not super complicated, yet as we're going to talk, things get a little complicated. The details matter, and it's about to get a bit murky. So,
big time.
Captain, we got a big behind-the-scenes talk that we're both going to be chatting about. So let's get going on that. There's a lot going on because this is really some of the first time we've seen TNG crew in a minute. So let's talk about all the development that happened.
That's the deal there. To paraphrase the somewhat controversial intro to Enterprise, it's been a long road. That's the deal there. So, it has been a very long road. And Enterprise actually comes up in our examination here. So,
excellent, yeah.
Yeah, so you have what I categorize the early 2000s to literally this year, a sort of prequel trap into which the Star Trek franchise had spiraled. So in the early 2000s, low box office returns for the next generation movies and a thinning mythos forced Paramount and later CBS All Access into this, I call it a prequel trap, where they could only fund projects based on easily recognizable characters and stories. And you can see that with the Discovery. This is one of the reasons why Discovery starts in the Kirk era, even though the modern season rather, starts in the 32nd century or some such. It starts there because of the prequel trap, and you also got the J.J. Abrams movies there too. Scholar Beta, what is your opinion on all that?
Okay, so at first I wasn't quite sure what you meant by the prequel trap. I'm grateful for that explanation. You're absolutely right. From a marketing standpoint, what were they going to do? Were they going to try to tell us about Kira and Neelix, or were they going to try to tell us about, Kirk and Spock? Who do you think people recognize more? So I guess on the one hand, I understand that. I was thinking more, there's this prequel trap concept where it's like, when you use a prequel as material for your story, you can really risk removing all the tension from the story because we already know how it's going to end. So if you want to tell a story in that world set before the main events of, say, your flagship series, you can definitely still do that by examining other characters. And I know Star Trek does do this a bit here and a bit there, but I just like to point out 2 very different examples. One prequel is called The Hedge Knight from the A Song of Ice and Fire universe that George R.R. Martin created. The Hedge Knight and those series of novels, excellent. Takes place in the world, adds to the world. We have a little cameo from characters we've heard of, but we don't follow them. So it's not like we know what's going to happen to them immediately, So that's a very successful example, I'd say. And then a non-successful example, I would say, would be the Star Wars prequels, because we already know what's going to happen to Anakin. Even though we see him as a little kid and, he's essentially a different character, ultimately we know how it's all going to end up. So like any tension where you try to put his life in danger or make him look like a really good guy, we just know he's going to live to be Darth Vader, and we know he's not going to be a good guy, So it's like, I thought that's where you were going with the prequel trap. We're obviously thinking of different things, but prequels are tricky, friends. They are tricky, and it takes some masterful storytelling. So that's what I wanted to elaborate. Thank you for bringing that up.
Awesome. And I want to point out that somewhere in between the Hedge Knight in episode 1, you have Prometheus and an Alien Covenant, where they tried to go one way with it. They tried to make it more Hedge Knight, but there are definitely some episode 1 Star Wars prequel elements thrown in there too. So
yes,
definitely, that's a really good point on that. Thank you for sharing that, Scholar Beta. So going into my thesis about the prequel trap mentality, if this goes even before Nemesis, actually, Scott Bakula, who plays Captain Jonathan Archer in the Star Trek Enterprise TV prequel, originally said he turned down the lead role because he didn't want to be, quote, another Trek captain. Then they countered with, you'll be the first one, and that's what got him to sign on. That's the deal there. So this prequel trap, in terms of what gets funded and what gets moving in a production sense, predates Star Trek Nemesis. So then you get the total decline of the Star Trek universe with the Star Trek Nemesis, both creatively and thematically, but more importantly, because Hollywood is a business, in terms of box office returns. So, oh yeah. So this is kind of interesting because maybe you members of our audience may not know this, but Paramount had essentially greenlit a follow-up to Nemesis, and a script was written and a concept was in place even before Nemesis came out. This original draft of the story, the original Star Trek 11, not the J.J. Abrams universe, not anything else, was allegedly entitled Star Trek Federation. And this is how it would have unfolded. A rip in the space-time continuum would have brought all of Star Trek's villains together to attack the Federation. Everything. V'ger, the probe from Voyager, Khan, Shinzon, of course, the Borg. Too much to handle for one person. So, as a result of that, Jean-Luc Picard is forced to team up with the crew of Deep Space Nine, Voyager, while also traveling back in time to retrieve characters from every chronologically previous show, including Data, they revived Data, Kirk and Spock, because who knows how to defeat Khan better than those two people, and Captain Archer from Enterprise. I guess there's some Xindi influence there. This was the idea. This was supposed to be the original Star Trek 11. So what do you think about that, Scholar Beta?
I don't know if you heard me, but a big sigh. You know, I am not grateful for Nemesis. I hate that movie. It's terrible, straight up. I don't like to sound like a total just like I was talking about tribalism earlier, but I really dislike that movie. But I dislike this premise a lot too. You know, to be honest, this sounds awful because in a single TNG film, my biggest problem, and even in the TOS films, you know, it's really hard to give everyone their share. You know, who gets knocked out of the TNG movies? Crusher first, Troy second, you know, LaForge third. It's always like that. They always get shoved to the side. And those are excellent characters. It's always the Patrick Stewart, Brent Spiner, and to some degree, Jonathan Frakes, so he gets to direct, so it's less about his character, you know? So how are they going to quadruple the size of the crew and still give people their, you know, their screen time, their time to be a character, to be anything more than a 3D, you know, a three-dimensional or one-dimensional cutout, whatever I'm trying to say? I just don't see that happening. To me, that's kind of a stinky garbage idea, in my opinion. But you know, hey, who knows? Who knows?
It's the same problem with Infinity War in the Avengers universe.
Okay.
Because
yeah.
when they announced the Avengers Infinity War, I was sitting there going, how could you give these characters basically the same criteria that you pointed out? How can you give them screen time and active agency to the story? And when I first read the script, I was thinking about this Avengers Endgame-like scenario where everybody comes together for this climactic battle, and then Captain Picard sits there and goes, Avengers, engage. And you have a major battle about that. And lots of explosions. Yes, Scholar Beta.
Okay, so that is interesting. Two things about that. You know, if Data had 3 of his own movies, and then was in you know, or if Crusher had 2 of her own films, can you imagine? They can't even get a Black Widow film. We'll never get a Beverly Crusher film or a Karen Reese film or, you know, or anything like that. But if those people had that screen time, then it kind of works, you know, because in your own film, you get a lot of your screen time. And then in this, you're an ensemble. And so you're going to take some hits. But like, if you never get that screen time to begin with, it's really tough to like feel like that character is a character at all. And then can you imagine a bunch of, you know, retired actors really, you know, fighting on screen together? That just seems...
It seems insane.
I love it, but it's terrible at the same time, you know?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, too. As much as we have our feelings about Picard, at least it's not that.
Yes.
At least it's not this movie.
Yes.
So with that in mind, this project died horribly after Nemesis's dismal box office return. So instead, it's worth pointing out that this is probably the... what am I trying to say? This is probably Paramount's attempt at saluting 40 years of Star Trek being on television, being in movie form, just the Star Trek universe in general. Because if you look at the chronology, this would have entered pre-production in 2003. And because of the logistics of getting everybody together and filming, you're looking at least a 2 to 3 year production, which means it would come out in 2006, which is the 40th anniversary for Star Trek, just the Star Trek universe in general. So we didn't get that. Yeah. Instead, we got, instead of a mega Trek crossover movie that would have easily rivaled the Avengers, we got a History Channel special narrated by Leonard Nimoy, in which Paramount auctioned off 40 years worth of props in their warehouse via Christie's auction house in New York. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's what we got. That's how Paramount.
What a substitute.
Yes, what a substitute. So that's the deal there. During Star Trek's 40th anniversary, though, it's worth pointing out that several Trek projects were pitched and in some cases were in pre-production that would take place after the Voyage or Nemesis era. However, and this ties into my prequel trap thesis, they were unceremoniously canceled. Worth pointing out there. So, this one right here, and I'm going to do extremely light summaries of these shows. There's a lot of evidence here. There's a lot of character analysis. There's even scripts for this one right here, Star Trek Final Frontier, which was pitched in 2006. It's an animated series, which actually has concept art and character outlines online. It takes place in the 25th century, the late 25th century, and the galaxy is wrecked because warp drive is completely unattainable. So, yeah. So the crux of the show, the main thesis of this show is, how will the Federation keep true to its values when the technological foundation of its society is gone? So
I got a question for you. Is this like warp drive is unattainable because of like the issues in force of nature? You know, where if they go too fast, they're ripping holes in space-time? Or is it unattainable because of like what they're doing in Discovery Season 3? I don't know if we want to spoil that or something like that, but what do we know why it's unattainable, or is it just like MacGuffin unattainable? It doesn't matter why.
I do. It's a little mix of both.
Okay.
But if you want us, you the audience, want us to do a Lost World of Star Trek episode in which we, or maybe even a series, there are a lot of shows that have been pitched, and even movies and cartoons that have been pitched over the years, gained some traction, and then were unceremoniously canceled. So with this situation, it's a combination of a couple different things. There's even terrorism that's involved. No. Yeah, involving warp drive, and I'm just going to leave it at that for the interest of time. So that being said, it's the worst case scenario for forces of nature combined with terrorism. So that's definitely worth pointing out there.
I like it.
So yes, this show actually had scripts. They actually did table reads, and then they killed it.
Oh, well.
So, yeah. Then you get, the same time, Bryan Singer's Star Trek Federation. Now, this is different from the other Star Trek Federation, which was Star Trek 11. This is a live-action spin-off.
It's a series.
Yep, it's a series.
Got it.
So, in this live-action spin-off, it's the year 3000. The Federation has completely collapsed, and the remnants of Starfleet build a new USS Enterprise, and I jokingly call it the Enterprise Z or Z because it's the year 3000. How many flipping Enterprises do they build?
Exactly.
And it would be under command of a distant descendant of Kirk, and the purpose would be to rebuild the utopia based on Star Trek's promises. And I see you have notes on this, Scholar Beta. So what are your opinions on that?
Okay, my first gut is no, because, again, get your dystopia out of Star Trek. What are you doing? Why are you taking the one science fiction franchise that is forward-looking, positive, and why are you trying to corrupt that? You know, you got it. Bryan Singer, if you want to put your fingers into X-Men and make that all dark, oh, wait, you did that already. You know, say, like, the people do this already in other franchises. Why do we got to do this with everything? Man, I almost want a time machine where I can time travel back to Christopher Nolan and let him know what a mistake it's going to be to make dark, gritty Batman films, which are going to make everything else have a dark, gritty tone from here on out. Okay, I digress, but I'm saying no to this idea. let's get back to a model civilization where our people are excellent role models, and then we go out into the galaxy and we resolve conflict. That's interesting, you know.
I
Yes,
absolutely agree, and
Captain,
I'm
what do you
looking
think?
for. I absolutely agree, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you are going to do your take on how when we do our plot construction episode where we examine these issues, but from a way that's utopian in nature. I'm really looking forward to that. So,
Yes,
with
I've
all
got
that in
ideas.
mind, oh yeah, so do I. These shows failed because they lack the recognizable brand name and concept the studio needs to properly fund them. And that's where it begins and ends with that. You could argue, and for those of you who have taken a look at Star Trek Discovery Season 3, you could point out the parallels between these kinds of pitches and what's happening in Star Trek Discovery. So at least you see it in some form, perhaps not the originally intended form. So keep that in mind. I am going to point out that Picard succeeded. I'm teaching the Civil War in class right now, so I succeed versus succeed.
Succeed, yeah.
Picard succeeded in breaking the prequel trap because of Jean-Luc Picard's household name, which in theory had enough financial security in which you could make a story about him because it's 20 years since we as fans have seen him. And that's what I'm going to argue is what broke the prequel trap for Paramount. What do you think about that, Scholar Beta?
Yeah, I mean, not only that, everyone knows the bald captain, right? Like on the most basic level, but also, Patrick Stewart, he's been working. He's been working and he's been in Hollywood for a minute too. Like, not just Shakespeare, not just his theater stuff. He was in all the Marvel stuff, which even though he didn't have, like the most front role in those X-Men films, he had a bunch of them, so like that just kind of renewed his screen presence, his bankability, all that good stuff. I honestly think more than Picard, it was Patrick Stewart, Sir Patrick, that is that what they were banking on, So yeah, I agree with that. I think, if I'm gonna make something that's not TOS, Kirk Spock related, I pretty much have to go with Picard. I can't even tell you who would be the next most recognizable character. Kirk,
That's a
Spock,
good
Picard.
point.
I'm not even sure who's next. Jane Seven? I don't even know.
That's a good point. So you bring up Patrick Stewart and why he's crucial. First of all, you can't have a Picard show without Picard. So
no.
How do you get Patrick Stewart back on the roll? Well, at first, it was a really hard sell. Patrick Stewart turned down the first offer. He said that he felt that he had given everything he could to the character and the series, and it's not important or not. He's not able to do anything more.
Yeah.
So that's the deal there. Then they came by his house. Akiva Goldsman.
Knock on his door. Hey, you home?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Alex Kurtzman and Akiva Goldsman knocked on his door, said, "Hey, are you home?" And according to Patrick Stewart in interviews, these two showrunners were so polite and enthusiastic that Patrick Stewart asked them to resubmit their pitch in writing, which makes me wonder if it was enthusiastic but not coherent, which could be the first telltale sign of what the show ended up being, or what. But that's the deal there. So he took a look at the pitch. He asked to be executive producer and have some creative control. And in my head, somebody backed up to his house with a dump truck load of money.
Yes.
And that's how we get Picard. And also being executive producer, in addition to having creative control, you also get an extra paycheck. So it might have had something to do with that too. What are your opinions on that, Scholar Beta?
All right, here we go, fans. Remember, I love Patrick Stewart and I love Jean-Luc Picard. So I'm gonna love him, keep him in my heart, and I'm gonna be critical at the same time. But to be honest, making Patrick Stewart the executive producer, I think, is the beginning of the doom of this show. Doom. And here's why. I think that Patrick Stewart is an incredible actor. I think his range is excellent. Go watch the TNG episode Sarek. I don't even think you need any other evidence after that. I'm pretty sure that basically seals it for me right there. It's full range. And I think when actors begin to take over screenwriting jobs, they want to put their character more centrally involved. They want to make their character as centrally involved as possible. And I think they can lose sight that Picard is part of a greater narrative and isn't the narrative itself. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but I got one other example, and that would be, look what happened to Nemesis when Brett Spiner was given a writing credit. I love Brett Spiner, an amazing actor. But Nemesis is awful, and they put it in the hands of mediocre producers and directors. I hate to say, but it's true. People that didn't have a long track record and had no track record with Star Trek. And then they said, Brett Spiner, what do you want to do? And he made it about Data, and now he has a clone before, and it's just, I don't know. That just really I just don't see it. I think if Patrick Stewart or if Picard was written by someone who understood the character of Picard, I think Patrick Stewart has quotes where he says he doesn't know where Patrick Stewart starts and Picard ends. He's talked about that in the past, and it's like, yeah, so let's have an outside perspective on that. I think that will really help you out. And I feel bad for him. The guy did 7 years of this, 7 years of Picard in 4 movies. And yeah, that's a lot of your life. And he does want to get away, and he does want to do other things. So it's like, he's put in a tough situation, and I think the dump truck of money, plus you don't have to be in a uniform. You can tell us what you want on this. Oh, we'll make it about Brexit. I think that just all dooms it. I think we should let the writers write it. Actors can bring amazing things to performances. See Harrison Ford in The Empire Strikes Back. They can totally lift up and elevate a performance, but also they can ruin a screenplay. See Brett Spiner in Nemesis. Last thing I'll say on this with Patrick Stewart, because I do love the man, but there's this quote that Picard in character says. He says, "I never really cared for science fiction. I guess I just didn't get it." Now, this line haunts the show, in my opinion, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to laugh and be like, ha ha ha, you're Patrick Stewart, you're Picard, of course you like science fiction, or is this an admission? Is this we are admitting that we gave an executive producer and writing credit job, or not writing credit, but an executive producer role to someone who doesn't get this show. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. So, hey, I think if it were in an ideal, if I was, ideally, we would let people who understood Trek write Trek, and people who understood acting, make these parts come alive. I think there's roles for writers and actors, and for a reason. I don't know. Maybe that's just too simpleton. I apologize if it is too simpleton, but that's my take on it. That's where I'm seeing Patrick Stewart in 2019-20, and I'm wondering about this.
I definitely hear you on that, and my reaction to that "I don't get science fiction" line was laughter. I guess it was comic relief, but the other perspective definitely shines through there too. Another thing to point out here, folks, is you have a case of musical producers. You have several showrunners, several producers. No one knows what's going on there. There's been many jokes about how when you look at the credits of Star Trek Discovery and Picard, there are more producers credited than actors.
Wow.
Yeah, there's like 20 odd producers every time you see the credits. And here's another thing to point out here. This might be why. When Patrick Stewart made his announcement on August 4th, 2018, very special day for me, I'll explain later, the materials seem to promote that either Alex Kurtzman or Akiva Goldsman of Batman and Robin fame would be the showrunner. Now, if you want classic science fiction, you want the guy who did Batman and Robin, my God.
Oh my, have they seen that film? Okay.
Exactly. So then in the summer of 2019, it was announced that Pulitzer Prize winner Michael Chabon.
I don't have any idea. I probably should have looked that up before we recorded. Oh, well. Yeah.
I've heard it on air as Chabon. So would be the showrunner. And then as of this taping, Michael Chabon has left the show. And Terry Matalas, a producer for Star Trek Voyager and Enterprise, has been pegged as the current showrunner. Now, it's also worth pointing out here, folks, that the viewership dropped by about 50%. What was that?
I was going to say, at least we get a Voyager showrunner on there. That's something, I like that better. I will talk about, and it is Shea Bond. Like I just looked it up. Shea, as in Shea Stadium. A little baseball reference for you, my friend. I know you
There
love
you
that
go.
sport. And then
There you
Bond,
go.
like Bon Jovi, Shea Bond. You're absolutely right. I'm going to talk about Michael Shea Bond a little bit later. I read his stuff when I was in high school a long time ago. Some of his short fiction and Cavalier and Clay. Great
Yep.
writer. Just I think he just was not used in the proper way. You know, as a showrunner, your job is to be an encyclopedia of Star Trek, man. I
Hmm.
mean, that's a big job. Um, anyways, yeah, I think that's kind of encouraging to see that change your perspective. But I'm
That
sorry,
is.
before I cut you off, when you were talking about viewership, what's going on with that? What'd you
So
learn about that?
the viewership dropped a lot. It's difficult to tell because CBS All Access will not give out official statistics. But in case
I wonder why.
yeah, I wonder why. But in the case of live broadcasts, because internationally it is shown on television, in Canada it dropped by 45%. So
There you
that's
go.
that's the deal there. That's the deal there. So with that in mind, we have reached the point of our discussion here where we will give an assignment, our first assignment. So here is the assignment that I am giving to you all, or rather we are giving to you all right now. So in the spirit of Star Trek Federation, the movie, not the TV show, I want you all, our audience members, to construct your Star Trek dream team of your favorite characters, including the captain, the crew, the starship, and the premise. And write it down in the comments below. So with that said, here's my pitch. Picture an undiscovered country era Constitution class vessel. That's one of my favorite vessels ever. Captained by Picard, with Kira Nerys as second in command, Dr. McCoy as the ship's surgeon, Charles Trip Tucker as the engineer, and Seven of Nine as security science officer. And the premise of the show is them trying to figure out the mystery surrounding this rip in the space-time continuum that brought them all together. Now, I need to point out, not all franchises need to be represented, but for the purposes of modeling, I definitely pointed that out. Scholar Beta, what's your show?
I failed at representing multiple. I failed at representing multiple franchises. My bad. Welcome to the bridge. You'll notice we have Captain Tuvok, Commander Data XO, Commander Rowe at Ops, Chief Engineer Geordie LaForge, and a new counselor taking Deanna Troy's place. We have Guinan, who actually auditioned for that or wanted to apply for that job many years back. But this crew is tasked with repairing the damage of the Dominion War, brought together by that space-time continuum. They are tasked with, beginning in 2378, on an experimentally retrofitted Constellation class starship with repairing damage done during the Dominion War. Sorry, that was kind of a weak. I did a bad job on that assignment. I don't think I'll be getting the special A+. But hey, I'm curious what people come up with. Let's see what y'all come up with, and I'm excited to read the comments. What's your dream team?
What's the dream team? Exactly. So with that in mind, we will read our favorite pitches in the next episode, the next full episode, the next 90-minute episode. So if you want to see if you got an A+ commendation, take a look at point 1 if you're watching the Lite videos, point 1 of our episodes, because that's when we give our A+ commendations. So with that in mind, let me reset the transporter here, and let's get into what works with this show.
Well, so we just wanted a deep dive of, what kind of was the development history of Picard, right? So I'm going to go actually back to the premise again, start with that, and then we'll get into what works. So if you recall, we were saying the premise was Picard is working on his family vineyard, now retired from Starfleet, and he's thrust back into the action when Daj, a mysterious young woman, visits him begging for his help. Unfortunately, she is killed in that opening episode. And then the rest of the series examines, or the rest of the first season examines Picard searching for her twin, her identical twin, Soji, and helping her find her hidden homeworld before the Romulans do. So that's the premise. That's what after 20 some years, after TNG, after all these attempts at reboots, after all these attempts at films and pitches from Bryan Singer on down the line, that's what we ended up with. So, Captain, I'm actually going to have you start. What do you think works with season 1 of Picard?
So I want to start out by saying Captain Picard is a very special character to me. Longtime viewers of the show know that I'm on the autistic spectrum and was nonverbal for many years and only became verbal after mimicking characters on the show, specifically Picard. So much of Picard impacts my psyche and how I operate on a daily basis. And the cornerstone of his character is diplomacy. So I want to be diplomatic here. I have extremely strong views for this episode, this show rather, and the episode we're doing. But in the interest of diplomacy and the spirit of Jean-Luc Picard, it finally broke the Nemesis barrier for me. I absolutely hated Nemesis. I hated it when it came out. We can explore that at a bigger time. And my biggest gripe with the show is that I hated the way it handled Picard and the crew of the Enterprise and just hanging there with nowhere else to go. It's a cliffhanger there. So many questions needed to be answered and they weren't. And I went through all the stages of grief when that happened. And yes. I got acceptance there eventually. But one thing I can applaud Picard for is it's not the unabashed fan service that what Star Trek Federation, the movie, the Avengers movie, basically would have been. It would have been fun to see. I just would like to see it out of morbid curiosity, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's kind of like how I'd like to see Stanley Kubrick's version of Lord of the Rings featuring the Beatles. You ever hear about that failed project that never got off the ground? I'd love to see that, but not at the expense of PJ's Lord of the Rings that came out, in 99, 2001, whenever that was. No way. I definitely want to keep probably 2001, I think is when Lord of the Rings came out. But yeah, morbid curiosity. I know what you mean.
Definitely morbid curiosity there. So, maybe one of these days, maybe we'll do an episode on it. Maybe we can find the script and examine it. That'd be phenomenal. So,
yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do a 90-minute Nemesis review too, where we're not diplomatic.
I'm looking forward to that. I would love that.
Okay, keep going, my friend.
Brief words to our audience, folks. What we're planning on doing after we're done with this, we're going to go back and finish our review of season 1 of Next Generation, giving assignments out and whatnot. So with that said, if you folks would like, between our reviews of season 1 and season 2, if you want us to review Nemesis or Generations or First Contact, whatever, or do a Lost Worlds of Star Trek episode, we can definitely do that. This is up to you, folks. You give us assignments, we give you assignments. So
hey, that's how it should be, isn't it? That's a little. I like that. Okay,
good deal. So
where were we? I'm sorry, I got us off track. Where were we?
No, it's all good. It's all good. So in the end, for better or worse, Picard answers questions that I had waited almost 20 years for answers. What happens to Picard after Nemesis? Did he retire? Did he go, at what point did he retire? What would retirement for Picard look like? I was always under the impression that he would try to be useful and do like an encore career. Maybe he'd stopped being a captain, but he did something else. That question was answered. For better or worse, it was. Did Riker and Troy start a family? That was answered. Patrick Stewart joked about it in interviews for the movie. His facial suggestions indicate that his facial expressions rather indicate that they might have been too old, but not only did they have one kid, they had two.
Yeah.
Did the data before memory transfer work? There were hints at the end of Nemesis that it did. Also, what happened between the Federation and the Romulan Empire after Shinzon? It's answered. More recently, since a part of Star Trek 2009 takes place in the 24th century, what was the degree of Picard's agencies to the event that sent Nero back in time? I would have loved to have seen that. I would have loved that to be explored more. I know there is a comic to Star Trek 09, a prequel comic that explains what Picard and the Next Gen crew were doing. Ironically, Alex Kurtzman has a writing credit on it.
Yep.
But I will maintain Star Trek is never properly canon until you see it on screen. Just saying. And there were many decisions that were made in this show that essentially decanonized that comic.
Yeah.
So that's what's good for me. You and I had a laugh about this. Originally, this part in the script says Picard does a good job Patrick Stewart does a good job at Picard. And then I realized the error of my ways and said, Patrick Stewart does a solid performance. Parentheses, not necessarily as Picard, though. So why did you take issue with the original draft that said Patrick Stewart does a good job as Picard?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, audience, it's hard to keep all my, some of my ideas, into the simple divisions of what works and what doesn't, because obviously when we're critiquing art, there's way more stuff in the middle, and so, yeah, this is kind of in the middle for me. I love Patrick Stewart. I think he does a great job. I think Jerry Ryan does a great job. I think even Spiner, for a tiny little bit he's there, I buy it. I think the crew I have no issue with, but I'm just really wondering if they thought about who this character Jean-Luc Picard is. Okay, so I was thinking about, I guess, who Picard is as a character, and I was thinking, man, they had 176 episodes and 4 movies to set this character up, right? And we know a ton about him. Go look at the Memory Alpha page on Picard. It's longer than most real life historical figures. Seriously, it is. There is so much there. I don't deny the acting talent of Sir Patrick at all, but I just feel he really isn't playing Picard. And I want to just really quickly look at a couple levels of characterization, some that they hit and some that they don't. So the most basic level of characterization, what I call level 1, we know he's a bald captain. We know he likes tea. We know he likes Shakespeare. We know he likes archaeology. We know he's not a family man, nor does he have children, nor is he really fond of them. And we also know that he was once assimilated by the Borg and went by the designation Locutus. Now, I think most, casual to recurring fans of the series know that, right? Just like maybe they know Spock is logical, has pointy ears, and Kirk is kind of a bad boy. I don't know. They know that surface layer stuff. Then more fans are going to know, deeper fans are going to understand the level 2 characterization. He's dedicated his entire life to Starfleet. He believes intensely in its core values and challenges the ranks above him when they don't live up to those values. He beats his foes with speeches that articulate these values, charisma over strength. He conferences with his staff. He gets their input on important matters, inclusion over hierarchical authority for him, right? And this is where I think they just really lost Picard's character. Picard retired from Starfleet instead of standing up to them when they refused to help evacuate the Romulans? Really? That's what Picard did? That was his choice? Mm-hmm. To me, I don't think so, man. I don't think that's how that works. Remember when just 2 movies ago, he said, be dang, I don't care about the Federation Council. I'm going to do what I want to do and defy this admiral's orders in the name of helping these indigenous people. So I don't know, to that level of characterization, they seem to have completely missed too. Also, the importance of his crew and getting input from them and recommendations, suggestions. Mm-hmm. Those are my favorite parts of his character, because and we know this as teachers, there's a tendency to want to stand up there and run the whole class yourself. But the more people you include in the design or the processes or the execution of the lesson, the better it is. Inclusion. That's what he's about. That's what this character is about, man.
Amen.
Okay. And so a last little point on this. And so I feel like they got some level 1 stuff, right? And then they totally missed level 2. Now, level 3 is what the real not the real fans, that's a horrible thing to say, is what the long-term fans, y'all know about this level 3 stuff. And this level 3 stuff is Picard probably loves his dead best friend's wife, but not her kid. You know what I'm saying? I know we can laugh at that, but that is the most subtle part of his character, that he is probably in love with Beverly Crusher. He has no idea how to express it. He ordered her husband to his death but somehow she can get over that many years later and can have a relationship with him. But the problem really is that kid. And so honestly, that brings all levels of characterization together, and I love that about 176 episodes of this show, developing that. And so here's my bottom line. I promise, Captain, I'm going to turn it back over to you. But my bottom line is, a lot of this stuff does not show up. And that I totally accept the idea that characters can change. Yes, if they didn't change, that would be boring. But look how long it took to set this up. It took over 7 seasons and 4 movies to set this up. Why would you throw it all out? This is excellent stuff to work with. I don't understand why they just felt the need to jettison level 2 and 3 characterization and just decide, what we're going to do? We're going to go with something totally different. So this did start in the movies. To Alex Kurtzman's defense, like they started messing with his character in Generations, definitely First Contact. It was a different person, a different person. So yeah, what do you think, my friend? I'm sorry, I just went on
no worries. And given your literary background, your analysis is right on the money. For the record, I am willing to give. I don't disagree with you on how they did Picard dirty in the movies. But I am willing to give First Contact a pass for a very specific reason, and we can discuss it when we get to whenever we get to review that movie.
Oh yeah,
I'm looking forward to that. But I do agree, they definitely did Picard dirty, and this is the apex of doing Picard dirty. There is a historical thesis, and you kind of touched on this, Scholar Beta, that says we've never gotten proper Picard since Generations. Definitely First Contact, but at least Generations. Operating under those rules, we haven't gotten level 3 or level 2 Picard back at all, but we've gotten close. And one thing I do want to point out where they did get close, legitimately close, under those new parameters is the scene where Picard reminisces about Data and explains his relationship with Data to Soji. With that in mind, that is something where, okay, you got about 7 hours worth of film, and that 2 to 3 minutes is good. Honorable mention, yep.
Sorry, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I know, right? But being diplomatic in the spirit of my great mentor, that is good acting on the criteria that it's close to Picard, or as close to Picard as the show's ever going to get. Honorable mention is that quasi-TV interview he had in the pilot, in which he vociferously explains why he made his decisions. I don't agree with those decisions, but it's something Picard adjacent. There's something where it's so bad it's good. There are parts of this show in which I laughed out loud, and not in an intentional way. The humor setup perhaps is not as intentional as they want it to be. There's a scene in the episode Stardust City Rag where Patrick Stewart just completely ignores everything about Picard.
Yep.
And just talks like a pirate, a French pirate. He even has an eye patch. And that episode is a terrible Star Trek episode for so many reasons. But on the other hand, it's so bad it's good. So credit where credit is due. Patrick Stewart seems like he's having fun. I had fun by proxy. But again, and I definitely appreciate your perspective on that, Scholar Beta, where we've never gotten full Picard, and we definitely don't have full Picard here, but we get close. Another thing that I think is good, considering the broader landscape of television, because this has been something longtime viewers of the show will know, I approach things more from a historical background and examining the show in context of how movies are made, shows are made, etc. This is not a straight-up Next Generation reboot or a revival. It's an attempt to continue the story. So when this show was announced, which was at the same time of my wedding, I always remember that. That's what made the day perfect. I married my wife. I love my wife. This is a great thing. And then the little cherry on top was Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart announcing that he's going to come back as Picard. And considering how much that man means to me, that character rather, that made it absolutely perfect. I am proud to say that the show, my marriage has fared exponentially better than the show has. But that being said, I hesitated on that joke a little bit, but I wanted to point out two things happened that day. Two things started that day. The show sucks, but the other thing that happened that day to me has gotten that monumentally better. I absolutely love it. But with that in mind, Patrick Stewart, even back when he announced it, emphatically said that Picard might not be a captain. Despite him emphatically saying that, so many people, even colleagues of ours, Scholar Beta, said, "Are you excited for the Star Trek Next Generation reboot?" Suggesting that they're giving Next Generation the Roseanne or Arrested Development treatment, where they bring everybody back, they throw out catchphrases, it's what you remember before. It's not that. I am glad it's not that. What are your opinions on that, Scholar Beta?
Yeah, on the one hand, I am very glad that they didn't, bust these actors out, CGI de-age or make up them to death, and then throw them on the bridge and, say, do your thing. I'm very glad for that. I am grateful. Despite my love for them, I just don't think that story is one I really want to see. We did, or like I've said over and over again, we've already seen 7 seasons of this crew and 4 movies. But here's the thing. However, if they said, okay, Alex Kurtzman, you can reboot, but you got to use the cast, which they would never say. But if they did say that, there's so many ways they could have used these actors, and it's a big galaxy, and it's not just full of starships. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Deep Space Nine or any of the other television shows, but it's not just about being on the bridge of a starship. At some point, it could be other things. And when we reveal our rewrites and our edits, I will explain how you can use a character over the age of 70 in a movie and have it be good. And you don't have to make it action nonsense. Because like we've alluded with Picard in the First Contact film, when he basically strips off into his, his tank top and he's swinging around engineering with the Borg green gas floating everywhere that eats flesh, that's just goofy. It just kind of breaks it a little bit. And I know he wants to be Bruce Willis, kind of diehard action, but I mean, there's other things you can do. And I just think, I am grateful that they didn't put him on the bridge, but I'm just saying, if that was the only idea you could come up with, you are not a very creative person. That's all I got to say. If the only thing you can think of is we got to put people on a bridge and make them say words, no, like catchphrases, nah, I don't have any idea. And for the record, I never saw the Roseanne or the Arrested Development reboot. I have no idea if they're trash or not. I had no idea. No idea.
If you want to know my beliefs on the Roseanne and Arrested Development reboots, leave a comment we'll talk about it, because I could get on a digression, but I no. So yes. With that said, this is not a revival for the sake of nostalgia, and that's the most important thing here. There are legitimate stories to be told without cashing in too much on callbacks. Now, you have a comment on this, Scholar Beta, but I agree.
Move on.
Go ahead. Okay,
let's move on, because I already made my point about the premise being, when all is said and done, my just comment is that, it is a new series, but the premise is really simple.
Yes.
It's not like ultra complicated or anything like that. But that's fine. It doesn't have to be. And I think that's a positive, that they honestly went with kind of a searching plot. I think that could have worked well, but, a little boring, honestly. And we'll talk about that when we talk about all the plots that are going on, because It could be exciting, but I just think it gets bogged down in too many other conflicting plots.
Definitely. So the creative choice of not making Picard a captain potentially expands storytelling possibilities and gives a different look at Picard's psyche in the concluding years of his life. That's the thing. This is why it's one of those things where I really wanted to love this show on the premise alone.
Yes.
Something different, something involving a character, something I absolutely love, but too much of the fundamentals break down to, from my perspective, make me enjoy it. Now, one final thing to talk about before we get into our assignment for this portion of our time together is the production office and the people behind the camera. Longtime viewers of this show will know, specifically in our critiques, that there are monocultures out there. Only one, potentially one culture being represented as a template for the entire species the Enterprise comes across. Yes. Scholar Beta, you have pointed out that despite Star Trek having progressive views, its representation and its approach, rather, in episodes that are problematic by modern standards, like Code of Honor, Haven, and Angel One, are indications of, to use your terms, the writer's subconscious or the production staff's subconscious. And I think that, coming from a psychological background myself, I think that's a very apt way of putting it. The fantasy of the same, I think I'm paraphrasing that. Yes, Scholar Beta.
Yeah, I just want to point out that phrase. I love that phrase, the fantasy of the same. That's N.K. Jemisin from her essay, How Long Till Black Future Month. Great essay if you haven't read it. It's online. You can check it out on her website. But yeah, that's where I got that phrase from. Just want to give her credit because she's an amazing writer. And she rightfully pointed that out. And I hadn't even thought about that until I read her thing or her piece. So brilliant piece.
Very, very well stated on all scores there. Definitely indicating a blind spot in the diversity of the writing staff, but yeah, that trend,
right? Historically, yes.
Historically, yes. But I'm happy to say that trend may be ending soon. Picard is more diverse in terms of showrunners and producers. Hanelle Culpepper directed 3 episodes of Star Trek Picard, including the pilot, and is stated as executive producer for 3 episodes. So, considering Star Trek has always been a more white dominated production staff, that kind of inclusion is very much important. What are your opinions on that, Scholar Beta?
I think that's a big milestone. If you do look at the people that they trot out, Michael Chabon, Alex Kurtzman, Patrick Stewart, the people they trot out, Jerry Ryan, to be the face of this, they're pretty white, still. But regardless of that, you're absolutely right. There is a lot going on behind the scenes that, the casual viewer may not necessarily, or that, the person who hasn't watched, the last 6 iterations of this franchise, they might not know about, including that even though Gene Roddenberry wanted to put a diverse cast in front of the camera, and believed in that we had moved on from segregation or racism and stuff like that, and wanted to show that the people behind the camera, not the same thing. So I agree with you, and I think that is a very positive development. And there's this thing that I've been working on with my students: the difference between diversity and inclusion. And I can't get, there's this group that we work with at school called Passion Impact, and they are the ones that came up with this metaphor. They're incredible. They said that diversity, that's having a seat at the table. But inclusion is actually having the ability to help construct and design the table. You know what I'm saying? And I love that idea. To me, classic Trek is kind of diversity, but maybe we're getting now more towards a little more inclusion in the writing and the creation of these stories. So I think that's fascinating, and let's see where it goes.
And I'm looking forward to discussing that, especially because I took that concept that you talked about in our character development. So next big episode, we're going to definitely talk about that. So with that said, we're going to get into our assignment for this section. So here is your assignment.
Captain, can I say one more thing on that? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just
go right ahead.
If, I'm not saying that there aren't white writers out there who cannot write diverse characters. Absolutely not. Of course you can. However, I still think that inclusion piece and allowing a larger, more inclusive writing staff to see the characters that are presented on the screen can only make it better, can only make it truer, realer, that's just my feeling, so just wanted to add that last thought on there. Back to the assignment.
Awesome. And for the record, I am going to, I bring up something like that for character construction next big episode. I'm really looking forward to that. So here's your assignment for today's section. pitch your own follow-up to Star Trek Nemesis in the comments, focusing on what loose end or loose ends from Nemesis you would like tied up. So very quickly, here's my version of this assignment. I would really love to see, and if you take a look at the description, I have a link to this because I'm in the process right now of completely rewriting the whole show, and I'm 3 episodes into it. And episode 1 is, as I said, it's available in the description below in the link. But I would really love to see a Star Trek Nemesis sequel / Star Trek 09 prequel explaining the events that tied the 2 films together. And that's what I was expecting a little bit in terms of what Star Trek Picard would be. I know there's potential political reasons or economic reasons, legal reasons as to why that didn't happen. But I would have loved to have seen that. And the way I've written, and I'm curious to see what you, the audience, what your opinion is on this, is having an episode or some sort of connective tissue between those 2 events. So that's my pitch. What's your pitch, Scholar Beta?
Imagine a 4-part Netflix exclusive miniseries where Picard must work as a Federation Council member, no longer a captain, to deal with the aftermath of the Dominion War. A newly anointed Kira Nerif chafes with Picard, Ambassador Picard, Council Member Picard, whatever he is in this, as he works in absence of Benjamin Sisko, the emissary of the prophets, who has not been seen in 3 years. I want my Deep Space Nine movie, but I don't want just a movie. I'll take a miniseries. I'll take 4 hours of Deep Space Nine, 5 hours of Deep Space Nine movie. But that's what the Dominion War is a big deal. We put a lot of time and effort into that. You know, that was one of the original multi-season arcs from Trek. And I'm a little sour on the fact that it made Star Trek so dark and so violent. However, if this show would be great if we could then get back to that utopia thing. Let's rebuild the Gamma, or let's help them. There's so much going on. How do we make the Jem'Hadar not addicted to Ketracel White? What do we do with the Vorta? Are we going to do some type of trial with the changelings and make sure they don't react? You know, there's so many good questions. So I want my proper Deep Space Nine treatment. And I'm going to start with Picard as his way of getting into that and trying to help out as a Federation Council member. But I think Kira and company really take over after that in the search for Ben Sisko. And is he coming back? I'd tease that until the very end. And then, of course, I'd bring Avery Brooks back because he's amazing. Let's go. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I took a long time to explain it. This is my favorite assignment of the 3 you came up with. I love it.
I love this, and that's great. I want to see your show. I think, and maybe for those of you who are in the audience, make a poster for that. That could be a second assignment. There you go.
I'll make a poster for that. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, you'll make a poster for that. Awesome. So, with that in mind, just a reminder to you, the audience, post your assignments in the comments. Scholar Beta and I will review and give A+ commendations at the beginning of our next big episode. So remember, episode 0.1 if you're watching this via Lite to see if you get a shout out. So with that in mind, go ahead.
Remember, we're teachers and we do a lot of grading already. And if we're willing to grade this project, that means we're definitely into it. You know?
Definitely.
Hey, anyone who's out there who's a future teacher, you're thinking about getting into this, remember, what you assign, you grade. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to assign boring stuff. You don't have to. You can assign interesting things that you actually want to look at. It took me 3 years to figure that out. So let me just, help you speed your journey up. Sorry about that. Anyways.
Words to live by. Words to live by, my friend. With that in mind, I'm going to reset the transporter here for what doesn't work about this show. And we might actually go the full length here. So with that said,
remember, yes, absolutely. We love Trek. Why would we be reviewing a show, TNG, if we didn't love this, right? There's no way you can say we're not into this. We love Patrick Stewart. But yeah, with their obvious holes, their obvious issues with this series, let's talk about them critically. We don't have to be tribalists. We don't have to defend every inch of this. We can expose some of its weaker threads too. And the one I want to start with is, to me, it is so shocking that they put this in here. It broke it for me in episode 1, to be honest. And that is the introduction of synthetic life forms that are called synths, which kind of sounds like dirty slang, honestly, for like a subhuman class of indentured servant. And they made them humanoid, and they were surprised by the fact that these people rebelled. Which obviously we find out later wasn't actually a revolution, but was something, programmed by Commodore O. But still, I was so shocked and blown away that they would introduce slavery into the Federation
Mm-hmm.
that I just kind of did a really full stop and, Measure of a Man from TNG
Mm-hmm.
second season, got to be in the top 10, 15 episodes for Trek fans. Maybe, I would assume so, somewhere around there, or at least we
Yeah.
know about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't we kind of discuss the concept of slavery and put it to bed that we're not going to do that? That we're not going to create a whole. We even did that. And do you remember the episode? I think it's called Quality of Life with the little exocomps that Data chooses to save over Picard in one scene.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, we have moved on from this issue, and to make this a core pillar of the series, slavery. Wow, that is bold, Alex Kurtzman. That is bold. What do you think, my friend?
There are a few things that let me put it this way. I absolutely agree with you that there are so many shocking things, and the synth thing and the fact that they're okay with basically slavery. No.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing Scholar Beta when we do part 3 of our review series, in which you tackle that, because that is a kind of thing that should be tackled. It just shouldn't be tackled by the Federation. And the episode that I'm writing right now deals with that in a very specific way, which tackles the topics they want to discuss, but in one self-contained episode. So, with that in mind, the world building, there's absolutely no world building here. And before I get too far into this, I do want to point out, lead-in comics and books do not count. Please, please, please. I know I'm not a video game person, but I do want to point out this. The concept of downloadable content.
Yeah.
Where you buy something to enhance the experience of a story or the experience of a video game, not fixing very critical flaws of the product itself. It's meant to enhance, not correct, which is something that, as we get into these big multifaceted universes, Hollywood seems to have forgotten. So what I'm about to say here, I want to say that it's not explained in the narrative we see on television, or in this case via streaming, and therefore this is a flaw. There are 2 questions I wanted answered. The first question was, what are the Next Generation crew members doing?
Making pizza.
Well, beyond that, what's Worf doing? Worf gets one mention, LaForge gets another mention, and Riker makes pizza. That's no.
What about Crusher?
Yeah, exactly. What about Crusher? She doesn't even get a mention. Worf and LaForge get mentions at one part of the episode, at one part of the show, but they don't. Once again, folks, it does not count that they made a movie. There's a book. There's a book out there called The Last Best Hope, or something to that effect. It does not count because it's not explained in the show proper. Just wanted to get that out there. Also, what's the state of the universe? Because if you pay very special attention to Star Trek 09, Spock says the supernova threatens to destroy the galaxy. And it destroyed Romulus. I had a take on that again. Once again, how does this happen? Now, in my rebooted version of the series, which I need to point out, I only did because 2020. This is happening in 2020, and Most Fun is canceled in 2020 because I needed to point out I terribly offended somebody by suggesting some things in a comment once, and they completely unloaded on me. Yes, on me, if you can believe that. So I want to point out, the only reason I took the time to redesign the show, partially is because I love it. I love Next Generation, and partially because current events have canceled everything else I enjoy. Can't travel, can't even go to the gym, can't do these things that I enjoy. So with that in mind, what is the state of the universe? And in my version of the show, and I'm curious to see what you all think of this, we talk about that. It's never addressed in the show proper. So that is my biggest gripe.
Okay, and I think I have a theory on why they don't answer these questions.
Lay it on me.
I think it's because Shaban is the showrunner. You know what I'm saying? I don't think. Okay, so here's what I'm saying. I think the guy is an excellent writer, But why did they make this dude the showrunner? You know, was that the only way that they could sign Patrick Stewart on? Is to promise a great literary mind, you know, as the showrunner and not some Trek hack that's going to force you into a uniform or something like that? I don't know, man. But here's what I would say. I would say make Shaban's job to invent and create new things. And maybe he did. Maybe he created Rafi and Rios and Girardi. I don't really know. I have no idea. But make his job to create the new characters that Picard will interact with, that Picard will have to, you know, incorporate into his crew. I think that would be awesome. Let a showrunner who knows about Trek get it up and running, and let some new blood come in and with the framework that's established, tell really interesting stories. And I'm sure Shaban could do that. But when you say, okay, it's now your job to construct the entire premise, state of the galaxy, state of the TNG crew, state of, you know, Starfleet, that's an overwhelming responsibility for someone who's never been a showrunner on Trek before, in my opinion. And I think it shows. They don't even answer those basic questions that you put in there. And to be perfectly honest, I bet in the scripts that they came up with, they didn't address Worf or Geordi either. But someone said, dude, you got to address them. So they threw in one line because they definitely are one-lined. Oh, why don't you call Geordi and Jorf? Well, I don't want them to get in trouble. I don't want them to sacrifice themselves for me. But Rios is okay to sacrifice for you.
And Rafi,
your Girardi,
your second number one, and Girardi, yeah.
What?
Yeah.
You know, that's why I think it's an issue of who's writing this, because that's a throwaway line that if you examine for 10 seconds, you realize, wait a second, you know, isn't that the whole point of Worf's character, that he would rather die in glorious battle defending, you know, his captain than to be retired on the sideline and told to not participate? He hates that. So I give that, I don't know. I think it's like, man, you got some talent. You got Patrick Stewart and you got Michael Chabon. Come on, let's use these people's talents. Let's use their gifts and their skills. That's what I'm thinking. And then, you know, I think this directly leads into the tonal issue. The tone is so wrong because we don't have someone who's intimately familiar with Trek running and maintaining the whole show. So I know you got some thoughts on the tone. Lay it on me. What you thinking?
Yeah, so the tone is anything but Star Trek. It's Star Trek in name only. New Trek borrows so many tropes and motifs from other shows that happen to be popular right now, when classic Trek generally innovated its own. That being said, I would be remiss as a historian to say there aren't certain episodes out there in which they generously, let's put it this way, were heavily influenced by another show that was popular at the time. The one that definitely comes to mind right now is Tapestry taking a page from Quantum Leap. I'm not saying that Star Trek has never borrowed from other shows, but never to this extent. Never to the extent of general tone and motif. Case in point, Game of Thrones, the HBO series. Excessively violent and gory just scenes, and also gratuitous sex thrown in there too. I need to point out that this trend did not start with Picard. Discovery set the tone there. But it's a very, very terrible precedent there. Case in point, there's a scene in Star Trek Discovery, which for the light version of the episode, I'm not going to splice in the footage because you don't need to see the footage. A reasonable human being should be able to go through their life without seeing Klingon Chi-Chis and a Borg getting his eyeball pulled out. You should not have to go through life and see that. You really shouldn't. And there's a major detriment to the story in the sense that it alienates your audience. I grew up on Star Trek, and because Star Trek was made available to me when I was 4 years old, at a point in time where I couldn't speak or make coherent thought. Star Trek empowered me at that level, at that age. And yeah, that's the deal there. You shouldn't be able to see Klingon chi-chis. That should just be an unspoken rule. There are places on the internet, if you're into that sort of thing, to go see that. It should not be CBS All Access.
I was just gonna say I might have a soft spot for Lursa and B'Etor, you know, and that's like their favorite thing to show off. But you know,
not like that.
Jokingly aside, yeah, exactly. Aside from that, I would say, yeah. What are we doing in this? Are we supposed to feel awe and excitement at discovering something new, or are we supposed to feel tension because Soji's, you know, getting closer and closer to her doom by Narek? Are we supposed to be grossed out by 7 of 9 evaporating people with laser guns or Borgs getting their eyes pulled out? What are we supposed to feel? You know, I don't know, man. It's all over the place. It is all over the place. I did look up while you were talking about gratuitous. And I would say instead of gratuitous sex, it's just gratuitous nudity in Game of Thrones. You know, like maybe the sex is reasonable, but the nudity, they definitely did that. So like, in case you weren't fully invested in the A plot, well, here's something to look forward to. You know, they actually kind of get away from that later, but you're not wrong about that. You're definitely not wrong about that.
Well, I'm glad I'm not wrong about that. I wasn't part of that privileged class of Americans who could afford HBO until HBO Max came out. So I'm behind on my Game of Thrones stuff. But there's also a comparison to Logan. This actually was intentional. There's a setting in which the world our hero fought to defend has collapsed, and the retired hero must come out of retirement to protect a young woman with extraordinary powers. As I said, that's probably one of the things that Patrick Stewart put in as executive producer. In theory, I'm fine with that. You have words on this, Scholar Beta.
I don't know. I'm just not a Logan fan. I know this is going to come off as overly negative, but again, I have a very special place in my heart for Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. And I love him to death, but like, I just don't know if we need to borrow from this. And I just don't know if we need to borrow from this and talk about gratuitous violence. Man, Logan, woo, lots of it. I don't know. Have you seen it?
Yeah. Yes, it's one of my favorite movies of recent time. That being said, a lot of, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, as a film, you know, it's one thing. You know, I think it was well made, and like I said, I love Stewart. I love Jackman in that. Do I need to see little kids running around murdering people? Well, maybe I do. Now I have. So there it is.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's definitely a good point there. With that in mind, to a lesser degree, and I know you have some words on this, people are making comparisons between this show and Westworld because of their attempted examination of synthetic life and synthetic rights. I just threw it out there. If you look at my script, it says synth rights ? And I think you have some words on this, Scholar Beta, so make it so.
I am insulted by this comparison. Westworld is a real show that is really intelligent. You know, and I'm not saying Picard isn't a real show. Obviously, it's a real show. It was filmed. It's out there to watch. But Picard is not some type of intellectual pursuit of synthetic rights. And if you think it is, there's that tribalist mentality because you're not watching the show. You're not watching the same show as I am, you know, or as we are. And you know, Westworld's entire core is the investigation of synthetic rights. That's the entire core of it. Every plot thread weaves back around to what makes us conscious, what makes us human. You know, can we pass our humanity on to technology? The answer in that story is an overwhelming yes. What do humans become worse creatures when we invent a type of synthetic life form? Yes. You know, without giving it proper rights or recognition. Yes. So I'm just saying, overwhelmingly, that show treats the idea of AI and android intelligence much better. Now, it's got its own storytelling issues. It's really complicated, and its storytelling chronology is all over the place, and you gotta really be patient in season 2, in my opinion. But I think it pays off. I think that show is a way better science fiction show and a way better action show as well, you know, and it too has the nudity and the violence going on, but it also has the intellectual through line of examining what makes us human, the idea of consciousness, all of that is just, you know, way better. And I'll just point out, last thing I'll just say on this is that, you know, you brought up Game of Thrones. I will say, you know, obviously, you know, the internet's abuzz with how that, you know, went down in flames. But in terms of first season, Game of Thrones and Westworld are much better than this show. They are way more constructed. The characters are more compelling, and the ideas, in my opinion, of those are pretty compelling. I'm going to throw this one out there too, and I might get some hate for this, but I'm even going to say The Mandalorian season 1 is even better, because in a weird way, even though it's not about it is some kind of the characterization, and Baby Yoda is kind of a trick and is pretty mean, in my opinion. At least The Mandalorian does this thing where it combos short-term storytelling, short-form storytelling, episodic storytelling with a longer arc, and it proves you can do it. You can have this big arc that runs throughout your entire first season, but you can also do individualistic episodes that reveal character. And the fact that Picard couldn't figure that out at all, I think that makes The Mandalorian a little bit better. So I'm just saying there's 3 examples of sci-fi shows that have either a tighter construction or do this long form, short form combination storytelling better. And this isn't a review comparing and contrasting those shows. That's not what we're about here. But in terms of, like, if you're going to look to borrow things, it is interesting that they borrowed parts and pieces, and maybe some of the worst parts and pieces, but maybe the parts and pieces that get the views, you know? Who can say? Who can say? You know, Game of Thrones has a ton of views, and maybe it is because of the excessive violence and nudity. You know, I'm not sure. I just, you know, I'm not sure who's pointing or who's making that decision to pull that in. I don't know.
That is a very good point. And that's the thing. Classic Trek used to innovate. Now new Trek follows. And that's my biggest concern.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. This is a utopia. We're not going to go the whole dark action route. We're going to keep this thing as an idealistic look at the future. Yeah, that was leading, not following. That was definitely leading.
Very well said there. So what is your opinion about the plot lines? You have a lot of words, Scholar Beta, regarding the plot lines. So hit it.
Okay. I know I've been talking a lot, but I'll try to consolidate this a little bit. Okay, so we got these 10 episodes, right? And my feeling, you know, more than anything, is that even though the premise is really simple, the plot is very convoluted. Okay, so we have 2 enormous backstory plots that are not really resolved or understood fully. The first one is the Romulan evacuation plot. The details of that are very confusing. Did the supernova happen in a day, in a week, in a month, in 10 years? Was the evacuation, I don't even know. I mean, they had time to build new starships, so they must have known this was coming for a while. I know the new supernova is explained in a comic book. I read that online, but I don't know how a supernova can threaten the entire galaxy. If you look at the galaxy, there's a lot of stars. The supernovas are happening all the time, you know, and I don't know. It's just very confusing to me how we could not evacuate or know about this. So that's one. And then the second one is the synth uprising plot. You know, it's just like those are thrown at us immediately, and it's very confusing about when and how these things happened. And I think we're just supposed to go with it, you know, and I have a hard time getting on board those 2 plots. You would have thought about that. What are you thinking?
Regarding the supernova, the only way you can have it make sense is if you include some sort of exotic matter as some sort of propellant or fuel for the supernova.
And that's what they do in the comics.
Okay. I wasn't sure about that. Yeah. And if you included something like the Omega particle being involved, the Omega molecule that was supposed to wreck the universe in Star Trek Voyager, totally okay with that. That works. So that's my point on that, but they didn't examine that. So
okay, this is a little, I know it's slightly digressing and we're going kind of long, but quickly, do you remember what Spock's plan was in Star Trek 09 to stop the supernova? Because I read this and I really thought about this. Can you articulate it?
He uses an experimental exotic matter called red matter, which creates a black hole to absorb the supernova ejecta.
Okay, follow-up question. How is creating a black hole in Romulan space helpful?
The idea is it's
I
supposed
love that
to.
you're straining on this one, and
No,
let's
well,
let's go.
So my take on this is, and this can be seen in the episode that I redesigned, and it's available in the description below. The idea at this point is to contain the supernova,
Yes,
like you would a wildfire. So what happens is you have people associated with the Vulcan Science Academy going around the perimeter and dropping these things to absorb the matter and absorb the energy, to basically quarantine the part of where the supernova is affected it. The part of the galaxy, which happens to be most of, this is me and my version of the show, most of the Romulan Star Empire, which again hasn't been explained in the show, has been affected by this, because even though they weren't wiped out because of the Omega particle involvement, you have fracturing of subspace where you can't use warp drive in certain areas. You have massive radiation spikes that happen ahead of the supernova, which causes ecological collapses. And that is how you cause the Romulan Star Empire, which is a contemporary of the Federation, to fall into fail state status. That is how you would do it. And that's how you could involve old Spock Prime using red matter, which is a silly invention, but my version of the show tackles that in a very specific way, in which you can do those sorts of things. That's my deal. That's how I would
too. I'm going to try to take that on as well. I am, but I'm just saying, man, they give us a pretty tough premise. We don't know a lot about this supernova, and we don't know a lot about the synth uprising. And to get back to the show, right? They start with that immediately. So it's like, okay, this isn't exactly a mystery because they come right out and tell us this happened. And so, but it's a lot of information to process, and we don't really know what to do with it, you know? Okay, so I'm going to go through this next part quickly, but this is the story proper. These are the plot lines we have going on. I'm going to read this quickly, and I hope the effect is that you're confused, because that's the whole point, that there's way too much going on. So here we go. We have the beginning of the story proper, which includes the Dodge activation plot and running away from assassins while seeking out Picard. Remember, that goes pretty much nowhere because that character dies immediately. The Soji on the Borg cube plot, including her relationship with Narek, who is trying to extract the synth homeworld information from her and then kill her plot. Again, that's pretty much a main plot, and that takes a long time to unfold. The Commodore O is really a Romulan, is using Narissa and the Yacht Vosh to wipe out synthetic life to avert the Destroyer prophecy. And then there's the revelation that O is behind the Mars attack. So, whoa, okay, that's a lot right there. And then we've got Picard's relationship with Data and his search for Soji and his brain issues and his golem body. And then we have his crew. We've got Rafi, her addiction, her broken family, that is a goes nowhere, does nothing plot. We have Rios and his trauma from seeing his father figure, Captain Murder, Suicide, a synth. That kind of goes nowhere too, you know? We have Girardi and her relationship, and then she murders her lover, Bruce Maddox, and then she is tracked somehow. I can't remember how she's tracked exactly. They must have put something inside of her or at some point, right? And then she's using the tracking device, and she doesn't really have anything to do after that, except like use a sci-fi device to make 1 million copies of the ship. And then we have Elnor, his abandonment issues and his ninja skills, and that goes nowhere and does nothing. Then we have Seven, her desire for revenge, her attempting to control the Borg cube, her crashing the Borg cube, and her killing Narissa, or I guess Narissa's dead. I mean, she could be alive. You know, maybe she survived that fall somehow and they're going to bring her back. I have no idea. Then we have Riker, Troy, and their son who passed subplot, which is supposed to foreshadow, I think, Picard and what's going to happen to him. I don't know. Goes nowhere, does nothing. Right? And then we finally... And that's all that stuff, my friend, takes place. That's 8 episodes, all of that. And then we get Synth Homeworld, Soong's son, Sutra, the attempt to destroy the beacon itself, the flower defense system, the robots that come through the dimensional portal. And we have the Romulan Synth Federation battle over the Synth Homeworld, where ultimately nothing happens and everyone goes home. So there's just a ton going on, a lot that doesn't go anywhere, but could potentially be set up for future seasons. But right, like that's kind of the crazy thing about the long form story. If you're going to take a story and you're going to weave these threads long term, man, it would be nice at the end to kind of see how they start to come back together. That is the real trick, right? That's the really hard thing to do. And I guess I don't want to say they have to do it all in one season, because those other shows that I mentioned, Game of Thrones, Westworld, The Mandalorian, they leave a lot of unresolved, but not as much as this. Not
That's
even
true.
close to as much as this. And this introduces way more. Arguably, Westworld introduces a little more in season 1, but this introduces a ton of stuff. And I kind of feel like they're throwing whatever they can, and they just want to see what sticks, and they're going to keep going with that, and they're going to ignore the other stuff. That's kind of the feeling that I get when I look at all these plots.
That's
especially
an apt
the new
description
characters.
there.
The Rafi, Rios, Girardi, Eleanor, I don't think they know what to do with those characters. I don't.
They don't. They really don't. So with that in mind, we've discussed everything that's wrong with the show itself. As we conclude our study of what's wrong with Picard, I do want to point out that there are significant things outside the show itself that bear discussion.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we've talked about the plot, and we'll talk about the characters later, but let's talk about kind of that ethos around it. Yeah.
Definitely. So with that said, there's this, okay, so the showrunners basically took a page from Star Wars, The Last Jedi, and start attacking the fans. Now, why are you going
to steal from that show? I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off. Why are you going to steal from that movie? Wow.
Exactly. So with that said, I want to make a few things very clear here. And Scholar Beta, you did a phenomenal job of articulating this up front. But the knee-jerk reaction from people, specifically Shaban, has been people who don't like the show are anti-social justice warriors or supporters of the current lame duck president.
Well, that wouldn't describe us.
No, certainly not, because I preface this by saying that I am an Hispanic, Latino, Native Hawaiian individual on the autistic spectrum who's a registered Democrat. Although I sympathize with the political perspective of the writers, I can emphatically maintain that their political messaging is the worst part of the show, and it borders on propaganda. Now, in my definition of propaganda, I state that the difference between art and propaganda is complexity, in theme mostly.
Sure, yeah.
That's the deal there. It's complexity and theme. With that said, fandom seems to forget that you can sympathize with the intents and virtues of the story, but can still criticize their execution. They're not mutually exclusive. And the thing about Star Trek is, specifically classic Star Trek, you never fully knew where they stood on political issues. They examined both sides of a political issue. Sometimes it went conservative, sometimes it went super liberal. Conservative episodes include The Hunted. I get, coming from a military family background, a very strong veterans' rights vibe from that episode, The Hunted. Yeah. The Drumhead has been taken by modern conservatives as a way to support freedom of speech. The Game, in a sillier aspect, you got the conservative video games are the cause of destruction in society. It almost destroys the Enterprise. Any episode that deals with space foreign policy, Journey's End is an example of this, where they tend to go more conservative than liberal. And then on the flip side, you got liberal episodes like Forces of Nature for climate change. They tackle LGBTQ plus rights very briefly, I grant you, but they do talk about it in Next Gen. So they go on both sides, and that's what makes it interesting, and that's what makes it art. Yes, Scholar Beta.
I was just thinking that Drumhead episode. Yeah, you could get the freedom of speech thing out of that. You could also get the immigrant rights, because Simon Tarsus is a quarter Romulan or something like that is what they go with. And yet he's accepted. We accept immigrants and outsiders and people who look different than us. I don't think the conservatives would like that message. But I think that's also in that show too. We're not going to judge this dude because of his DNA.
But that's the deal, and that plays into my point here. That's what makes it art. The complexity, the multi-layers there, the fact that you can get something that can be derived for a conservative talking point freedom of speech and censorship, etc. And on the flip side, you can talk about immigrant rights and the fact that Starfleet almost violated its own beliefs by profiling a person who was 1/4 Romulan. That's what makes it art. That is what makes it art. That's what fuels conversations. Conversations like you and I talking over Google Meets every Sunday, which we release every Tuesday, about Star Trek. That's what makes it art. That's what, by definition, propaganda has to be simple. Propaganda has to very quickly and very efficiently get the message across. Using that definition, Picard is propaganda, classic Trek is art. That's all I have to say about that. What are your opinions on that?
Okay, so here's I completely agree with you about the handling of political issues and the examining them. Remember that I mentioned that issue, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, The High Ground, one of my favorite kind of episodes that kind of goes under the radar. They are looking at terrorism. You know, they're talking about, on one hand, they're talking about how these people who abducted Crusher are terrorists. On the other hand, they're talking about how George Washington was a terrorist, you know, from the British's point of view. So, like, I think that's pretty fascinating. You know, that's some interesting stuff right there. So, yeah, I agree with you on the fact that this show has a long-running record of looking at political issues from multiple perspectives. And then think about it. If we had a more inclusive writing staff, think about how much more of a richer discussion we could have about political, racial, cultural issues. There's a lot out there that we could explore. There's a ton out there. And it would be great to not just look at it from a Western kind of ethnocentric point of view every single time. You know, we don't need that. We don't need that. Mm-hmm. You're right. That becomes propaganda at that point. And, you know, I'll just point out a couple more things, too. Like, there's some really fascinating contemporary issues that are way cooler than Brexit. How about, like, computer privacy rights? How about, you know, the effect of social media and fake news and echo chambers? Maybe you don't want to get into that in Trek. What about stolen elections or environmental crises? You know what I'm saying? I just thinking of, like, 2 or 3 off the top of my head. There's just some way cooler things to explore out there than Brexit. And I know Patrick Stewart wanted to make this about Brexit. And again, I'm thinking, why are we giving this guy an executive producer credit? Because that's the only way we could get him to make the show. And I understand. I get it.
In the spirit of Picard and pragmatism and compromise and diplomacy, you could do both. And this ties into future episodes that we're going to tagline too, because I love that. And I'm curious to see how we could weave these in when we do our thematic review, not next episode, but the episode after that in our Picard series. But very quickly, your assignment for this section. In the spirit of Star Trek Picard, borrowing from the plot of Logan, here's your assignment. Pitch a story in the comments below, forgive me, involving the plot or tropes from another franchise that you would like to see get the Star Trek treatment. Here's my model. Basically, James Bond meets Star Trek. You could call it section MI-31. Picture the protagonists who are cool and suave of Bond and antagonists who are over the top, but with the technology, messaging, and geopolitical intrigue of Star Trek. That's what I would do. You want to do something else? You want to do, you know, a General Hospital theme thing, Grey's Anatomy meets Star Trek? I guess you could do that. But I'm curious to see what you, the audience, are saying, and leave your pitch in the comments below. Scholar Beta, do you have a pitch for this?
I'm going to say Star Trek, but actually smart like Westworld. In the foreground, our protagonists are a combo of synthetic life forms and struggling to gain consciousness, and the TNG crew members struggling to find their way in life after their bridge positions have been replaced by these synthetic life forms. And in the background, we have 2 chess masters. I love that kind of chess master behind the scene, pulling the threads trope. Bruce Maddox on the one hand, and Data. Oh, we're going to reveal that Data is also still alive and is a chess master, pulling strings and manipulating the pawns until Picard is able to expose Maddox and resurrect Data. There you go. There's my idea right there.
I like that. Yeah. That's really good.
That's something that is Westworld's all about. You know, are people dead? Are they synths? Who are they? What's going on? Who's pulling these strings? Who came up with this whole thing? Do they have a master plan? The answer is yes, because they thought about the show more than 10 minutes before they wrote it. Sorry, just kidding. That was a joke.
There you go. So with that said, folks, we're wrapping up our time here. Next time on Captain's Yacht, we're going to examine the characters and what we could do to revise or strengthen the characters in the show, including Picard. So we're looking forward to that. Stay tuned. Remember, folks, fill out your assignments and post them in the comments. And we're looking forward to giving A+ commendations, memes, whatever. And we'll go from there. But as we wrap up, as we dock back with the ship, so to speak, several thank yous are in order. So big thank you, mahalo nui loa, to Memory Alpha for name checking. Scholar Beta, you have thank yous?
Yeah, just again, yeah, Memory Alpha, you're invaluable in this quest. I had no idea how to spell Yacht, Vosh, or Narek, or any of those words. So thank you for being amazing in there. Trekcore, I'm going to shout you out, even though I didn't get to hang out at your website this week. I assume you got some cool stuff on Picard. Maybe I'll go check that out. But always love you. And of course, those listeners, especially those listeners who complete our assignments and contribute to our conversation. We love all those listeners, but those who go the extra mile, and throw some things in the comments that we can chat up about next time. You're really awesome. And hey, you don't even have to put your name on it. Remember back in the day where if you didn't put your name on the assignment, it didn't get
you wouldn't get assignments?
Don't worry about it. You just it's automatic on the YouTube. So yeah, thanks to those who are participating and staying engaged.
There you go. With that in mind, folks, big mahalo nui loa, live long and prosper, and see you next time.
Peace and long life. I think we're docking back.
Awesome.
Thank you.